Just over a month ago, Van Rysel released a new range of endurance bikes, named the EDR CF Ultra. Today, I'm going to rate them against these categories. So, first off, let's get into that headline specification. All three builds feature a carbon frame and fork with a claimed weight of 830 and 400 grams respectively. The frame has clearance for 38mm tyres, and fitted to every build are a pair of Continental GP5000 ASTR tyres in a 32C size. The frame and fork also have mounting points for mudguards. Some thought has been put into component sizing, as the extra small bikes come with 165mm cranks and 38cm wide handlebars, while the extra large bikes come with 175mm cranks and 42cm wide bars. All three builds come with Van Rysel's own carbon handlebar and alloy stem, but that's where the similarities between these builds stops. The most affordable bike comes with Shimano 105 Di2, the second most affordable comes with Shimano Ultegra, and the most expensive CF Ultra comes with the new Sram Force. Key differences between these builds are that both Shimano builds come with an in-peak power meter, while the Sram build comes with a Sram power meter, all of which are chainset based. The Shimano builds come with a 50-34 tooth chainset, while the Sram build comes with a 48-35. Cassette sizes also differ across all builds, going from 1136 to 1134 to 1036. Saddles slightly differ too, as they go from being a 30-degree light on the 105 build to a Physique Terra Argo X5 on the two pricier options. The last part of the specification to talk about is the wheels. All builds come with carbon wheels and seemingly all share pretty similar rim specifications. They look to offer a 22mm internal width and are 35mm deep, but that is where the similarities end. The hubs go from being DT370s on the 105 build to DT240s on the Ultegra build to being DT240s with a dynamo hub on the Sram build. That's right, a dynamo hub on a stock bike. The use of some aero comp spokes and those slightly better hubs on the Ultegra build help drop the weight from 1500 grams to 1430. But the weight then jumps all the way back up to 1700 grams for that dynamo wheel set. But since that weight will be at the hub itself, spinning the wheel up won't feel too arduous. Right, let's leave the specification there and now go through my pros and cons of that specification. I'll start with the pros. I think the claimed weight of the frame and fork is pretty respectable. It's not uncommon to see endurance bikes come well over what Van Rysel is claiming. I do like the thought that Van Rysel has put into speccing different lengths of crank arms and different widths of handlebars. For an endurance bike, comfort is king, and things like speccing the right size components will go a really long way in helping to create that comfort. I also really like the 8-degree flare that can be found on the handlebars, as it'll offer more stability and control when riding in the drops. I think the use of a compact chainset is good. The spread of gearing is also going to work really well for those who want to spin their legs up the climbs, which really, when I think about it, is probably most people. And lastly, on the pros, I really like the use of Continental GP5000 ASTR tyres. In my experience, they're a strong, robust tyre and also perform really well at speed. Now then, on to the cons. I do think it's a shame to only see 5 sizes be made available. A broader range would be better, especially if that resulted in smaller iterative steps between those sizes. I think the 22mm internal width on the wheels is slightly narrower than I'd like them to be. For a bike with a 38mm clearance, having 23 to 24mm would be more appropriate in my opinion. Lastly, and it is a bit pathetic of me to point out, and it really doesn't matter, but the stem is incredibly ugly when you drop it further down the steerer tube. I think you'd really have to commit to chopping that chimney off. There's a couple of things that I've not been able to put into a pro or a con column. And first up is that in-peak power meter that's found on both Shimano builds. I am very glad to see one be included, but I've had no experience with one, and as such, I cannot comment on whether or not they're any good or bad. And secondly, that dynamo hub on the Sram build. I do like that Van Rysel has done it. I believe dynamo hubs are going to have a real resurgence, but in a similar way to when SmartSense from Cannondale was first released, I'm not sure how it's going to sit with consumers. I wonder if they'll feel like they're paying for something they don't actually want. I'm sure most riders that would be considering this bike will already own a set of lights that they'd rather use. The new version of SmartSense is much better than the first generation, as there's one central battery that's hidden away from view, and that runs the lights, radar, and gears. In this scenario, that makes sense. But if on the EDR CF Ultra you're still having to charge up your AXS batteries, use a separate rear light and radar, and suffer the weight penalty of a few hundred grams, I wonder how much value that system is really adding. So then, who is this bike for? Well, Van Rysel claims that it was designed for multi-day adventures, ultra-distance rides, and demanding cyclo-sportives. It also says that the EDR CF Ultra combines racing DNA with endurance-specific engineering to deliver a ride that's fast, forgiving, and ready for the long road ahead. I know, that was quite a lot of marketing spiel, but it does paint a picture of who Van Rysel is trying to target. If you're someone who likes to ride long distances and is pretty serious about it, then this bike could be one to consider. However, I think there's one fundamental flaw in their positioning. If Van Rysel is going to say this bike can be used on multi-day adventures, then the frame really should have mounting points for panniers. Also, on the bike down at the bottom bracket, there's some wording in the paint. It reads, on/off-road ready. Again, I think this is misleading. With tyre clearance going up to 38mm and coming with a pair of 32C tyres, albeit some rather strong ones, I would not be suggesting this bike is designed for off-road use. Hard-packed gravel, sure, but claiming anything more is a stretch. Currently, you can kind of put all endurance bikes into two buckets. There's tarmac-based endurance bikes, like the Canyon Endurace, and then you have all-road endurance bikes, like the Specialized Roubaix. I think the EDR CF Ultra belongs to the former. After combing through the bike's geometry chart, the EDR offers more stability and control than a Giant Defy, but is arguably more slightly performance-focused than a Trek Domane. As a bike to live with, I can't see either of the Shimano builds causing you much grief at all, once they're set up. While the lack of bag mounting points is a bit of a miss, in reality, I doubt those buying this bike will be looking to use it for multi-day bikepacking adventures, and the inclusion of mudguard mounts helps to keep it versatile enough for those wetter days. Of course, all three models will need their groupset batteries charged, and the Di2 models are slightly more awkward as you'll need to bring the whole bike to a power source rather than just the batteries like you can with the SRAM build. Also, the hydraulic brakes will eventually need some maintenance, and the integrated routing will make at-home jobs just that little bit tougher. From a servicing point of view, the EDR is pretty similar to every other bike that sits in the mid-tier of modern road bikes. Unless you're a well-equipped and skilled home mechanic, this bike will be one to be looked after by your local mechanic. Now, it's time to talk about value, and potentially, unsurprisingly, Van Rysel has done a good job of packing in value, but they aren't the cheapest, and they are charging just a little bit more than some competitors in some models. I think the EDR is definitely better by comparison to the Trek Domane, as I think the Domane's wheels slightly let it down. The Giant Defy is very good value, and you could buy a power meter with the saving, and then it's near enough equal, but it is more of a dynamic bike, and I think it does serve the slightly more performance-orientated end of the endurance market. I think the Canyons look the best, and thanks to their wide-spanning range, you can go one of two ways. There's the CF SLX7 Di2, which uses a supposedly better carbon layup, helping to improve ride characteristics and reduce weight, but that costs £200 more and suffers with less tyre clearance and no power meter. Or you can go for an Endure CF7 Di2, which is £700 cheaper than the Van Rysel. You could add a power meter and still likely save some money. The Endure certainly sits more at the dynamic end of the endurance bikes, along with the Defy, so if comfort and stability is what you're after, on paper at least, the EDR should deliver more of this. When looking at the Ultegra and Force equivalent builds, I think this is where the Van Rysel really shines. It's certainly better value than what Trek or Giant has to offer. The closest competitors would be from Canyon, but there's no escaping the fundamentally different geometries. So in this case, again, it depends on what you want the bike for and which bike will fit you best. In my opinion, Van Rysel has created a well-spec'd endurance bike at a very competitive price point. The messaging around the bike though is just a little bit confused. I do like that Van Rysel is doing something different with the dynamo hub, and since SRAM built bikes do tend to be a little bit more expensive than their Shimano counterparts, I'm not too upset at the extra £500 that the customer will be paying for the feature. I reckon a couple of £100 at least can be attributed just to that dynamo system. The lack of rack and bag mounts is a shame, but again, easy to forgive considering the value. I'd like to get my hands on the bike and test the power meter though to see how that really performs. If you remove some of the conflicting messaging, the EDR CF Ultra is, in my opinion, made to be used on tarmac, and it is more relaxed compared to competitors like the Defy and the Endure, so it should offer plenty of comfort. Let me know down below though, what do you think of the Van Rysel EDR CF Ultra?